Is mercy still mercy when it echoes inside a hangar? The flag rope clicks against the pole, each snap a reminder of orders followed too long. They mocked him for lifting a wrench instead of a fist, yet the enemy mechanic passed him the socket key, and silence became their truce. A flight badge glimmered in the dust as engines coughed a live heartbeat slow beneath the dawn's thin light. Still, some repairs don't serve sides at all. They serve what's left of dignity. The snow had stopped before dawn, leaving the airfield crusted in white and smoke. A captured pilot walked between two guards toward the largest hangar, his boots squeaking on frost. Inside waited the wreck of the enemy plane that had shot him down. The doors yawned open with a groan that felt personal. Light spilled across twisted aluminum, a bent wing panel jutting out like a scar. The smell of oil and cold iron clung to everything. Somewhere a Red Cross parcel sat unopened on a workbench, proof he was still considered human, at least on paper. "This is the one," a sergeant said in German. "You will make it fly again." He didn't answer. His throat had turned to sand. When they handed him a wrench, he weighed it in his palm, the same weight as guilt, the same chill. He'd spent months replaying that final dive, the tracer smoke curling past his canopy, the flash, the spin, the dark. Now the machine that ended his mission waited for him like a mirror. He knelt beside the wing, tracing its jagged edge. Fingers found bullet holes he couldn't tell apart from the ones that had torn through his pride. The guards whispered behind him. He caught one phrase, "American mechanic," another voice, "Traitor's work." He spoke without looking up. "If I fix it, maybe no one else gets hurt." No one replied. Only the drip of melted snow echoed off the tin roof. He pressed his hand flat against the fuselage, cold metal, warmer resolve. That simple contact steadied him more than any order ever had. Outside, the wind rattled the hangar like distant applause. "You understand instructions?" a mechanic asked in broken English. "Enough," he said. "I built my own before the war. Then build again." The man passed him a rag, careful not to touch his fingers. Two worlds sharing the same air, the same task. He wiped the grime from the wing's insignia until the paint shone dull red beneath the dust. He didn't know whether the gesture was forgiveness or defiance. It felt like both. Minutes stretched. Each bolt he loosened carried a memory, the first solo flight, the last radio call, the sound of static turning into silence. He tightened new bolts where old ones had torn loose rhythms steady as breath. Every twist of the wrench whispered, "Stay alive by being useful." When fatigue crept in, he looked toward the small window near the ceiling. Sunlight angled through like a searchlight that forgave instead of accused. He thought of the chaplain's words back at camp, "Mercy isn't surrender, it's maintenance." Maybe that was what this was, maintenance of his own dignity. "Need help?" the German asked. "No," he said softly. "If I can break it, I can mend it." The mechanic nodded once. Between them, the language of tools replaced the language of war. Somewhere a kettle hissed on a brazier. Someone poured coffee, and the scent drifted through the chill air. It almost felt like morning back home, hangar doors open, crew waiting for orders that didn't come from hatred. He crouched again, aligning the first plate over the ruptured seam. The metal shivered as he drove the screw home. Another turn, another heartbeat. He paused, listening to the echo of his own breath. No cheers, no accusations, just the steady click of the wrench, marking time. When he finished that single bolt, he sat back on his heels. The others watched, but said nothing. In that silence, something shifted, not victory, not defeat, but a beginning. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of both nations settle into stillness. He reached out once more, brushing away frost from the repaired joint. The reflection in the metal caught his face, older, smaller, but clearer. Then he tightened the next bolt and the next. He tightened the first bolt on the plane that shot him down. The next morning, the hangar smelled of thawing snow and burnt coffee. The captured pilot waited near the bench while tools were counted like rations. Frost steamed from the cracked windows. Men spoke softly in German as if afraid their voices could disturb the wreck that divided them. Hans Becker, the gray-eyed mechanic, stepped out from the shadow of a half-repaired fuselage. He looked younger than his silent sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands blackened by grease. Without a word, he reached for the work table, lifted a wrench, and held it out. The pilot hesitated. "That mine or yours?" Becker shrugged. "Ours if it fits." Metal met skin, the handle warm from Becker's palm. A brief exchange, no handshake, just the soft click of ownership shared. Outside, the wind scraped against corrugated walls. Inside, two enemies stood an arm's length apart, learning a new grammar built from sound scrape-tap-turn. They began to work in rhythm. Becker loosened rivets while the pilot cleaned the threads. One inhaled as the other exhaled. Between them, the engine block looked less like a weapon and more like a puzzle missing patience. "Tight enough," Becker said. "Tight is safe," the pilot answered. "Safe." Becker gave a half-smile. "In war." "In machines," he said. "They behave if you respect their limits." Becker nodded once, the motion small, approving. The pilot sensed curiosity replacing suspicion, a quiet trade neither would name. A clerk entered papers in handcoat still buttoned. He set a file on the table and brought the rubber stamp down hard, a slam of procedure, not violence. The echo rolled through the bay like thunder delayed by conscience. A purple seal spread across the form, authorized maintenance enemy asset. Becker winced. "You see," he said, "even ink salutes the rules." "Then let it," the pilot replied. "We have enough noise of our own." They worked again, slower this time. Steam drifted from the canteen pot on the nearby stove, rising in delicate curls that broke apart between their glances. Neither reached for a cup. The scent of burnt grounds filled the pause where conversation might have lived. The pilot wiped his hands on a rag. "You trust me not to ruin it." "If you wished to ruin it," Becker said, "you already could have." The pilot almost laughed, the first sound in days that wasn't metal. "Where'd you learn to fix planes?" "My father taught me clocks," Becker said. "After that, anything that ticks or turns." "Then you already know how fragile time is." "We both do." They shared the wrench again, passing it back and forth like a slow metronome, keeping their hearts in measure. Each clink against the bolt felt like punctuation in a conversation they didn't yet understand. Beyond the windows, a bell rang for the midday meal. Neither moved. Duty had become its own ration. Becker finally reached for a thermos, poured 2 small cups, and slid one across the table. The pilot accepted it with both hands. The coffee was bitter honest. After this, Becker said, "They'll test it. If it fails, we both answer. If it flies, then the sky forgives us." The pilot looked at the plane's dull skin catching the steam. Forgiveness, he thought, might be mechanical after all, a process, not a prayer. Becker gestured toward the open wing joint. "Here, your turn." The pilot crouched, aligning the wrench with the waiting nut. The metal tightened smooth and obedient. A thread of hope twisted in place. "Perfect," Becker murmured. "Maybe," the pilot said, voice low. "The plane might fly, but will I?" The question hung in the air longer than the scent of coffee. Neither man tried to answer. The only reply was the soft hiss of the kettle cooling and the rhythm of tools finding their mark. Night thinned across the barracks like smoke from an old lamp. The men slept in rows, breaths shallow, the sound of boots settling in dust. At the end cot, the captured pilot lay awake, the memory of the hangar still clinging to his hands. He reached beneath the mattress and pulled out a scrap of paper wrinkled, smuggled from the workshop trash. He flattened it on a plank and began to draw the damaged wing from memory, the bend of the spar, the torn rivet lines, the places where metal had surrendered. The pencil whispered across the paper, shaping what daylight had broken. Every line felt like both confession and repair. From the far bunks came a low murmur. "He fixes their planes," one voice hissed. "Maybe he likes the company." The words slid under the wooden frames like rats. He kept drawing, but his hand trembled. Doubt crawled up his arm, heavier than fatigue. Then a creak the door. He looked up. Becker stood in the Gap coat collar, high eyes steady. The German said nothing. He simply leaned against the post, guarding the threshold as if keeping the night itself out. "They think I'm building for the wrong side," the pilot said. "You build for the sky," Becker replied quietly. "It has no sides." The pencil paused. The searchlight from the yard swung past the window, cutting a white arc over the page. For a breath, the beam turned the graphite lines silver. He held still until the light moved on. He started again, slower. His strokes softened into curves, shaping airflow instead of armor. A blueprint emerged, not of perfection, but of grace under pressure. The wing's ribs bent inward, absorbing strain the way a heart absorbs guilt. When they tested, Becker said it must not fail, nor will it, the pilot answered. Failure would be noise, and we've heard enough of that, and if it flies, then maybe forgiveness has its own design. Becker nodded once, half a smile ghosting through fatigue. The two men watched the page like believers at an altar they had built from paper and courage. Somewhere beyond the barracks walls, a chapel hymn drifted faint through the winter dark, carried by a wind that smelled of coal and coffee. The tune curled through the broken window pane and rested above them, uninvited but welcome. For the first time since capture, the pilot did not flinch at the sound of harmony. He folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into the pocket of his jacket. It wasn't an order or a map or a weapon. It was proof of understanding. Becker extinguished the lantern, leaving only the glow from the distant PX window, pale and constant. The pilot lay back, hearing the quiet turn of guards outside. Tomorrow, he knew, would ask for evidence of this fragile trust. The lines he had drawn would have to survive daylight. He closed his eyes, breathing in the faint scent of graphite and oil. Dawn will test the drawing. The morning came silver and sharp. Frost edged every line of metal on the airfield. Engines waited like hearts that had forgotten how to beat. Inside the hangar, the captured pilot tightened the last series of bolts along the enemy wing panel, his hand steady against the chill. "Fuel line secure," Becker called. "Pressure stable," he answered. "Try the ignition." Becker climbed into the cockpit. A cough, a sputter, then the long-denied roar of power. The sound startled the guards outside. A few ran in rifles, slung but unused. Here weapons were only echoes of rules. The engine's vibration filled the hangar until even the floor seemed to breathe. The pilot stepped back, face streaked with grease. The propeller spun faster, blurring the morning light into a halo that wrapped both men in a single noise. He wiped his sleeve across his forehead. It left a dark mark that looked almost like a cross. The German officer in charge strode forward. "So, the plane that shot you down flies again." The pilot nodded once. "It flies straight." The officer's mouth tightened. "Your camp record will note cooperation." "I wasn't cooperating," he said. "I was correcting a mistake." The man frowned, but Becker's voice cut in softly. "Sir, he made it safer than before." No reprimand followed, only the wind slipping through the open hangar doors, carrying the engine's hum toward the runway. Outside, sunlight scattered across the frost. For a moment, everyone listened, the shared breath of adversaries joined by machinery. Becker climbed down, gloves blackened. He looked at the pilot, eyes bright with something that wasn't victory. Then, in silence, he lifted his hand to his brow and saluted. The guards hesitated. One followed, then another. 3 raised palms in unison, their salute now not the Reich's, not the Allies. It belonged to decency itself. The pilot stood motionless, bound by the unspoken rule that prisoners do not answer such gestures. Regulation pinned him in silence, the way memory pins guilt. But his chest rose, once proud, steady. If protocol was the cage, dignity was the key that refused to turn. He reached for the workbench where his torn flight badge lay cleaned and mended. Becker had repaired it quietly, stitching the frayed edge with thread meant for uniforms. The pilot held it to the light, then set it against the fuselage, a token return to service. The engine throttled down, coughing out smoke that smelled faintly of freedom. A radio somewhere crackled static, blending with the new calm. Outside, snow melted into thin streams that traced runnels toward the runway. He stepped to the hangar door and let the propeller's back wind brush his face, a silent beat of absolution. "You'll test it?" Becker asked. "No," he said. "I think it's already proved something." They both looked at the plane standing whole again, every rivet a word for mercy, every seam a sentence in a language the world had forgotten how to read. The pilot turned once more toward the field. The aircraft rolled forward a few feet, sunlight glinting along its skin. Forgiveness, he thought, doesn't march, it taxis forward. The library foyer smelled of varnish and paper. Afternoon light pooled on the marble floor, turning dust into soft constellations. At the far wall, an old projector clicked to life, throwing tremors of white onto the screen. Ellie adjusted the focus knob. The film hissed, then steadied, grainy black and white, the texture of memory itself. On screen, 2 men beside a plane, both smiling against the wind. One wore a prisoner's jacket, the other a mechanic's cap. Between them, the repaired wing gleamed like truth rediscovered. "That's him," she whispered. "My grandfather." Students gathered behind her whispering. Wait, he fixed their plane, so he was a traitor or a hero. Hard to tell. Ellie didn't answer. The comment feed on her laptop scrolled faster than her pulse hashtags arguing justice and betrayal. She let them run. The film, not the feed, deserved the voice. The reel popped once. She tapped the reel arm gently, keeping it turning. The propeller spun on-screen sunlight, flashing in slow rhythm. The audio hissed, but a few words cut through Becker's German accent, faintly audible. He made it safer than before. She looked toward the projection. "Grandpa," she murmured, "they finally saw what you meant." Someone in the audience asked, "What did he mean?" She smiled, voice steady. "That mercy can be engineered." The audience fell quiet. On the wall, the pilot raised his hand, returning a salute that rules had once forbidden. The image froze for a moment, the frame burning slightly at the edges, silver halos licking the outline of two men joined by forgiveness. The enemy plane gleamed whole again, wings outstretched like a reconciled idea. Ellie stepped closer to the beam, her silhouette cutting across her grandfather's face. She spoke softly, more to the light than to the crowd. He said forgiveness had its own design. I think he drew it. Her fingers brushed the table where the film reel spun. Each turn sounded like a heartbeat counting backward through decades. She could almost hear the hymn he once mentioned in his letters, the chapel song drifting through a foreign winter. Outside the library windows, rain began gentle against the glass. The reflection doubled the screen now, 4 figures saluting 2 in film, 2 in ghosted rainlight. Ellie's breath caught. Mercy looked heavier when carried by time. The librarian whispered, "Should I stop it?" Ellie shook her head. Let it run out. Some stories fade better than they end. The final frames jittered. Light pulsed, then the image froze completely. Her grandfather standing by the aircraft. Becker's hand raised beside him. The projector bulb hummed, painting their salute onto the wall like a stained glass confession. Ellie waited until the reel slapped empty. The room stayed lit by the afterglow of the frame, a pause stretching longer than speech. She whispered one last line barely louder than the projector's cooling fan. Some repairs wait 80 years. The museum lights rose like dawn through glass, clean, deliberate, forgiving. Visitors shuffled toward the new exhibit at the far end of the hall. On the wall hung a small bronze plaque flanked by the faint reflection of an aircraft's wing. Beneath it, a single flight badge rested in a velvet case. Ellie stood quietly, the folded program trembling between her fingers. The words on the plaque read, "He repaired the enemy plane and earned their salute." Around her, the air thickened with that kind of silence people save for prayers. A veteran in a blue jacket removed his cap. A child asked her father why the man in the picture was smiling. Because he fixed something, the father said. A plane. More than that. The museum's loudspeakers hummed to life. A radio broadcast from the 1940s played VE Day reports, crackling earnest. Then the static softened into a chapel hymn, simple and unhurried. Its notes drifted through the gallery, filling the glass cases and corners where dust had gathered, reaching even the rivets of the old aircraft that gleamed under the lights. Ellie stepped forward. In her hands, the flight badge seemed impossibly small, lighter than the decades it carried. She opened the case and laid it beside the plaque. The metal caught the light and flashed once, an echo of propeller sun. For him, she whispered, and for the man who saluted back. Behind her, camera shutters clicked, gentle, respectful. Each sound felt like punctuation in a sentence history had waited too long to finish. The curator leaned toward her. "You know he said we restored the film last month. You can see their faces clearly now." "I've seen enough," Ellie replied. "It's not clarity that matters. It's memory." A pause. She placed her palm flat against the plaque. The bronze was cool. The silence beneath her touch was warmer than any applause. Outside, wind shifted across the lawn. Someone had left the hangar doors open on the old training aircraft display. For an instant, an engine hum rolled faintly through the open corridor. No machine actually running, only the air moving the way sound remembers. It curled through the hymn like a blessing disguised as echo. Ellie closed her eyes. The pressure of her hand on the plaque felt like holding a heartbeat. She pictured him, hands steady on a wrench, the German beside him, the salute that had crossed language and law alike. The hymn faded. The hum lingered. Light spilled across the photograph behind the glass. Two men, one salute the shape of mercy rendered in metal. The crowd stayed still until the last note dissolved. Ellie drew one quiet breath and spoke the words engraved in the plaque's shadow, her voice barely above the whisper of the radio. He repaired harm, and they answered with a salute.